Hello students, in this session we'll start discussions with respect to the module 4. And the module 4 includes airport characteristics and airport classification, and also we'll study about how airport planning has to be done considering the objectives and the different components and various types of airport layouts can also be studied, and also the socio-economic characteristics of catchment area and criteria for the site selection as per the ICAO stipulation, and some of the typical airport layouts, parking and circulation area will be covered under the module 4. So now we all know that the airport is a location where the facility for landing and takeoff operation for aircrafts are made available. Fundamentally, the airport is the point of connectivity in the transportation system. So when we have the airport transportation, airport act as a system or end of the trips that will provide a change of mode from ground to air or air to ground respectively. So now when the airport planning is done, you have to keep it in a mind that the plan is not a very simple and it physically a form of an airport for the development, or it should also provide the stage development of the entire airport area both for aviation and non-aviation purpose, and land use adjacent to the airport while involving both financial implication and physical studies have to be done. We'll now look into the airport transport characteristics. So the airport transport has some of the characteristics which includes, so the air transportation provide the unbroken journey. So that means to say that we can have an unbroken journey over a land or sea, and it is also one of the fastest and quickest means of transportation. And air transportation provides rapidity. So we already know that air transport has a highest speed among all modes of the transportation. At the same time, the air transport is expensive, okay, compared to any other mode of the transportation, where huge investment of purchasing the aeroplane is required and construction of aerodromes, airport facilities. So you have to invest more when the air transport has to be considered. And also for operate the aircrafts, we require special preparations such as, so wheelers link, meteorological station has to be established, floodlights are required, searchlights are required by if you want to trace the aircraft. So such special operations are required and which are not essentials in other mode of transportation. So now we'll look into the what all the various types of airport classification. So now the depending upon the convenience, the airports are classified into different types. So which includes the based upon the first classification is based upon the takeoff and landing. The second classification is based upon the aircraft approach speed. Third is on function. Fourth is on based upon the geometric design, and we can also classify the airports based upon the aircraft wheel characteristics. So study one by one in detail. So the first classification is based upon the takeoff and landing. So this means to say that how much runway length is available for takeoff and landing. Depending upon that, we have the classification as, the first one is conventional takeoff and landing airport. In short, we can call it as the CTOL aircraft. So here, where the runway length, the available runway length for takeoff and landing operations will be more than 1500 meters. 1.5 kilometers of runway length will be available in the conventional takeoff and landing aircrafts. And next one is the reduced takeoff and landing airports. As the name indicates here, the length available for the takeoff and landing operation have reduced, and we have a restriction where the runway length is up to 1000 to 1500 meters, or 1 to 1.5 kilometer runway length will be available. The next one is a short takeoff and landing operation airports, where the runway length will be 500 to 100 meters, and the other one is the vertical takeoff and landing airport, so where the total operational runway operation area will be just 25 to 15 square kilometers. So now here, depending upon the land features or ground features where at the airport site, So you can just sometimes the or higher altitudes or where we have in the hill stations, it may not be possible for you to have a longer runway length. So depending upon the contour of the region and ground site conditions, you can choose any one of the runway length. So as and when the restriction increases, runway length reduces, the restrictions will be more for the pilot, and he has to carefully land or take off the aircraft wherever there is the restriction to the runway. The second classification is given by the FAA. So FAA stands for the Federal Aviation Administration Agency of a United States Department. So it has given the airport classification as per the FAA. So airport can be classified as category A, B, C, D and E. So now here the classification is based upon the aircraft approach speed. So that approach speed is given in terms of the knots, where 1 knot is equivalent to 1.852 kmph. So we can classify the airport as category A if the approach speed of aircraft is less than 91 kmph, B and 91 to 120 kmph. Similarly, for other uh, category of the airport, the FAA has given what is the limitations for the aircraft approach speed. The next classification is based upon the function. So based upon the functions, we can have civil aviation and the military aviation. So civil aviation is consists of for the operation of a public, okay. So flying of representing any non-military aviation, both for the private and the commercial, or the transportation of the goods. So within the civil aviation, we can have a domestic airports, where the airports handle only the flights within the same country. Okay, and in the domestic airports, we generally do not have the custom and immigration facilities. And the second civil aviation aircrafts are the international. And international aircrafts is an airports or the airports which customs and border control facilities are enabling passenger to travel within the or between the countries. And the second type of airports are military aviation. So where the airports are meant for military aircrafts and flying the machines for the purpose of conducting or enable the aerial warfare, including the national airlift capacity to provide logistical supply to the force sustained in the theater or along a front. So next classification is based upon the geometric design. So this classification is given by ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. It has classified the airports into A, B, C, D, E. Okay, and now here the geometric parameters which are considered while classifying the airports includes the basic runway length and the width of the pavement and maximum longitudinal gradient provided for the runway. So when you look into that, for type A airport, so we must have the runway length more than the 2100 meters. So it is one of the conventional takeoff where the runway length is more than 1500 meters, and width of the runway is 45 meters and the longitudinal gradient is 1.5 percentage. Similarly, the geometric parameters, the elements, how it should be for various types of the elements are given by the ICAO, and from here you can note down that the maximum gradient at the for the runway provided will be restricted to 2 percentage. And next, the last classification is based upon the aircraft wheel characteristics. So depending upon the load carried by the wheels and the tire pressure for a single isolated wheel load. So we have the aircraft classified as code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different codes have been given. For example, if you want to see for the code 3, isolated wheel load will be 27,000 kg. So there's a load carried by one single wheel with a tire pressure of 7 kg per centimeter square. So these are all the various parameters how the airports can be classified. So now we'll move on to the airport planning. What is airport planning? Why it has to be done? And we also look into the different components of the airport. So airport planning is, we will do airport planning to design and plan an airport and design the facilities that are required for the runways, taxiways, and also that will also impart the knowledge regarding the visual aids, so which includes the airport markings and the lights. So now the objectives of the airport planning includes to prepare a proposed comprehensive airport standard manual for the airport, which incorporate the necessary information and regulations to the users of airport. And secondly, to prepare a compatible land use and height restriction plan, which is very essential for the aircraft operations near the vicinities, include the recommended zoning protection within the airport influence zone, and also rehabilitation and reconstruction of the airfield payments to provide a safe airport for our operations, and providing a high quality and aesthetic facilities that can be marketed for aerial tours and economic development. And also it includes the identifying the planning areas for future hangars and aviation and related businesses. So now we'll study first, before we do the airport planning. It is very essential for us to understand the various components of the aircrafts. Clear? The layout of an airport mainly depends upon the configuration of the runways. How many runways are there in the airport? How the runways are oriented. Okay. So first in the airports, we will locate the runways, and all other components such as the terminal buildings, taxiways, hangars, aprons, etc. will be further considered in the airport layout. And other airport layouts has to be correlated to for the in such a way that integrated layout is developed for giving the smooth traffic flow, and keeping in the mind of a taxiway distance has to be minimum and provide the shortest route for the passenger. Okay, and the proper airport layout what we have considered, that must be functional and it has to work in the full efficiency with the minimum space utilization. And an engineer should attempt to provide a simplest design which yields optimum service to the passengers. And some of the characteristics of a good airport layout must include, it should have a safe landing, taxiing and takeoff operation. All must be independent operation without any interference. And the layout should provide a shortest taxiway distance from landing, loading to runway end. And it should have a safe runway length, safe approaches, excellent good tower visibility must be there, adequate loading apron space, sufficient terminal building facilities must be there, and sufficient land area to permit subsequent expansion of the airport in future, and lowest possible cost of the constructions. So this is the picture representing the various component of the aircraft. So here you can see the first component is the runway, and next we have the taxiway, aprons or the ramp, hangars, terminal building, control towers and the helipads. So next we will discuss the functions of various aircraft components. The first component in the airport is the runway. International Civil Aviation Organization ICAO defines the runway as it's a rectangular area on aerodromes prepared for landing and takeoff operations of the aircrafts. So usually when the runways are constructed, you have to provide the turf shoulders on both the sides. Okay, to be considered when we design the runway. The first one is the direction of the runway should be in the direction of the wind. So that means that when we decide what should be the direction for landing and takeoff operation, we need to consider the wind direction. We will study that in detail how the runway has to be oriented under the fifth module. Okay. The next is the number of how many runways has to be provided in an airport. That depends upon the traffic. Okay, how many aircrafts are expected. or how many passengers are using the particular airport, which will decide say how many aircraft has to run. Clear? So depending upon that, how many aircrafts are expected, the number of runways can be chosen. And runways can be prepared using the bituminous or concrete surfacing. The width of the runway will be dependent upon the maximum size of the aircraft utilizing it, and the length of the runway is depending upon the different considerations like elevations and the contours. So now all the parameters. And so here, when the length and width of the runways are decided, you have to keep certain points in the mind that the runway has to accommodate the aircraft which is likely to be served by it, and it has to provide a facility such that it will accelerate the aircraft to the point of takeoff and brought to stop the aircraft within the 60 percentage of the available runway length. So if I provide the runway length has 1000 meters, the aircraft has to stop within the 60 percentage of the runway length. It means to say that the length required to stop the aircraft should be 600 meters. Okay, that point need to be considered. And the length of the runway depends upon the various meteorological and topographical condition of the region. The another important consideration is that the transfer gradient of the runway that should not be less than 0.5. If you see here, this is the runway portion where on the both the side the stuffed areas are provided. So now what percentage? The next component is the terminal building. So it's also we can call it as the airport terminal. Okay, as we already know, these are all the buildings that are spaces that meant for the passengers board and are alive from the flights. So here the terminal building should have all necessary facilities for passengers to check in their luggages, clear the custom, and to have lounges to wait. And terminal buildings can have the house cafes, lounges, or bar to serve the waiting areas for the passengers. And it should also include the ticket counters, luggage check-in or transfers, security checks or customs, which are the basics for all airport terminals. So now you can see here is the picture of airport terminals. So airport terminals are designed for a best aesthetics so that it can attract the passengers. The next component is an apron. So apron is a place is used for parking place for aircraft, and aprons are also sometimes called as the ramp. Aprons are generally paved and it is usually located in front of the terminal building or adjacent to the hangar. So what should be the size of an apron? Okay, how much space is required for the parking the aircrafts? That will depend, or usually it should hold 5 to 10 small planes or large areas for the major airport has to be provided. The size of the area to be allotted for the apron design is generally governed by the number of aircrafts expected in the airport. Okay. So aircraft characteristics also considered by design. So here you can see this a place which is meant for the parking the aircrafts, okay, which is called as the apron, or we can also call it as ramps. The next component is taxiways. Taxiways is the path which will connect each end of the runway with the terminal area, apron, and hangars or any other part of the airport components. So usually the taxiways are laid with the asphalt or concretes like a runway. So this is usually used for the movement of aircrafts within the airport for various purposes, such as whenever the aircraft has to take an exit for the landing or exit for a takeoff, and for a maneuvering operation the taxiways can be utilized. So generally the speed of the aircraft at the taxiways is less than during the takeoff and landing operation. So usually in the modern airports, the taxiways are laid at an angle of 30 degree to run the runway so that aircraft can use to change from one runway to the other runway easily. And it is also required to note that the turning radius of the taxiways and the runway should not be more than 1.5 times the width of the taxiways. And similar to the runways, the longitudinal gradient of a taxiway should not be greater than 3 percentage, and the transport gradient should not be more than 0.5 percentage. So now you can see here in the image, so this is the runway of a particular airport, and the adjacent to the runway, what you can see here, there's a portion which is given for the change of aircraft from one runway to the other runway, or to lead to the apron or the hangar portion. Yeah. So the next component, so this is another picture of airport layout. The next component is a hangar. So hangars, as you can see here, we can station our aircraft within the hangars. The hangars are generally a closed building structure constructed in the large shed form using a steel trusses and the frame to hold a aircraft or any spacecraft. So usually the hangars are used for the protection from the weather whenever there is a heavy rain or the strong winds, or to protect it from the direct sunlight, and generally it is used for the maintenance, repair, or manufacture or assembling the aircrafts. The another important component of the aircraft is the so the air control towers, it acts as a nerve system to the airport, as it is responsible for the active runway surfaces. Air controls clears aircraft takeoff landing and ensures that the prescribed runway separations will exist all the time. The controller from the controller tower observes all the aircrafts within that zone and informs pilot about their airport traffic, landing routes, visibilities, wind speed, runway details, etc., based upon which the pilot decide and attempt for safe landing or towers operation. The last component is the parking. The parking is very essential in any airports. Airport parking is the means that can car usually park adjacent to the airport and doesn't require transport to get it from the airport terminal, or as it's within the short walking distance from the terminal. Airport parking activities are important contributor to the commercial revenue for the stream of an air. So these are all the some of the important components of the airport. So when we design the airport, all these components must be there in a typical airports. Yeah. So first, as I already explained earlier, the first we will decide the what is the orientation of the runway, and all other components of the airports will be decided depending upon the availability of the space. Thank you.